And we're really happy to be able to have Scott Osborne here to give a presentation on interviewing and some tips to kind of demystify what employers are actually looking for. Scott works for Procter & Gamble, but he started off at DePauw University, where he got his BA in chemistry. He does have his PhD from the University of Michigan, working for Gary Glick, and then he went on to Indiana University. And then since 1997, he's been working at Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati, and he's currently the section head within the Beauty Measurement Sciences organization. And very importantly, Scott has been coming here for a number of years, for 15 years, looking at the wonderful talent at the University of Michigan and really leading the recruiting efforts here now. So he has a lot of wonderful insights, and I look forward to hearing what he has to say about interviewing. So if you could welcome Scott, that would be great.
Thank you. Hopefully I speak loud enough so you guys can hear me. If not, raise your hand. There's a microphone that can amplify my voice if I need to. Thanks for inviting me. My background, I like to say that I was a student of Gary Glick. I have the scars to prove it. Those who know what it's like to be in grad school and working hard, I enjoyed every single moment that I was here from 1990 to 1996. I was one of his first grad students, me and Patrick Swanson, who's now a professor at Creighton, and we had a great time. And then after that I went to Indiana, did a postdoc there for just about 14 months before I got a job at P&G. And from a recruiting standpoint, which is the context of part of this discussion, although I'm not actually physically here on a recruiting trip, we came up because our company, P&G in Michigan, has a very strategic relationship that has really developed into something pretty special. Our Chief Technical Officer, Kathy Fish, is in town yesterday and today to review with your leadership, your university leadership, and I had a chance to sit in on those this morning, and some of the great work that we're doing together collectively. And so I want to maximize my opportunity to be up here, and Peter and the team, everybody invited me to come up and speak. So I am going to talk a little bit about my history of recruiting. I've been recruiting for about 15 years. I've recruited at Texas A&M, Los Alamos National Lab, University of Maryland, and then obviously here. And I've been here now during recruiting here. I think it's been more than 10 years here, maybe even close to 15, but I think no, it's been at least probably 16, 17 years entirely. And so what I'm going to provide for you is a presentation I did probably 7, 8, 9 years ago, I think at Texas A&M, because somebody asked me the question is, what are some of the things that I need to think about when I'm doing an interview itself? So this is focused on the actual interview. So there are some assumptions that go into this, and one of them is that you've actually got an interview, okay? But we're going to go into some of those in a minute. But these are also, what I did is I did the 10 commandments of how to ace the interview. I have a few opening disclaimers, okay? So my opening disclaimers is that this is one man's opinion. So this is not, this isn't necessarily been blessed wholeheartedly from our company, and it certainly doesn't represent what other industry does. And so you may find that other organizations, if you've interviewed with them in the past, they do it completely different. Well, that's fine. I'm giving you my opinion. Hopefully some of these things will translate to what you've experienced. I typically see what doesn't work more than what does. And so I try to catch some of those landmines to let you know what are those things you want to try to avoid. And of course, this does not guarantee employment with me or anybody else, so there's my personal disclaimer. So this is just, and I'm doing this for two reasons. One is I have a passion for the company, recruiting for the company. Two, I have a passion for Michigan. And I have a passion to make sure that you guys, who I was in your seat probably about 20 years ago, not really sure what I wanted to do with my life. And so I want to try to at least provide a little bit of pulling back the curtain to see a little bit what it's like on the other side. And honestly, it's meant to supplement any other advice you get. So those are my disclaimers. So on with it, okay? So here we go. The first, getting the campus interview. It starts with a strong resume, a strong background. We look for things that are examples of technical mastery, things like leadership, things of that nature. The thing about that is you can't invent this. You have to have been doing it. So if you're in your 5th year right now, and there's a lot, and you don't have good examples of leadership, you can't just create that in a matter of a week. It's something you're going to have to go focus on if that's something that you think is a gap in your skill set. And so I tell people, the resume is essentially a window into your life, your history. And the interview, in many respects, is a window into who you are. And so one of the things which I'll foreshadow is you can't make it up, okay? Because we'll figure that out that you're making it up. You can't. So the last thing is publishing. Publishing is very important. It helps provide validity to the work you're doing. Now I realize that some faculty publish more than others, and so we take that into account, particularly what level they are in the organization, what areas they are. So don't think if I don't have 10 publications, I have no chance. It's not so much the number, it's the quality, okay, and also what your involvement was in those. And we'll talk about if you guys have time with me one-on-one with resume looking at, that's where I'll talk a little more about publishing and some of the things that I look for when it comes to publishing, because that's a slippery slope, because I don't look at numbers, I look at the quality, okay. In terms of a well-written resume and CV, there are some things that I look for in those. One of the things that a big pet peeve of mine when I look at resumes is I have a hard time telling who you worked with, who is your PI, and then how is that work related to what's on your publications. A lot of times you'll show the schools that you work with, particularly if you're a postdoc. You may show your undergraduate, your graduate, and your postdoc, and I don't know who your advisor is. And if I don't know who your advisor is, I don't know which publications are for which. And so that becomes a part that I have to start to piece together. And when I'm looking at 20 or 30 resumes, the less I have to piece together, the more I'm going to focus on your actual CV. And then also the other thing I like to point out is don't just think about just your work in graduate school. Don't think of just your pedagogical or your educational background. What are some other things that you do that's a passion of yours, that maybe outside of school, that demonstrates your leadership, your maybe your ability to operate with some discipline or have some agility, things that maybe demonstrate. So it could be a youth group, it could be a volunteer program that you're in, it could be some other thing that you're doing that helps demonstrate who you are outside of the classroom, so to speak, because that's an important part. So those are kind of the first and foremost kind of getting to the interview. So we're going to assume now in the rest of this conversation that you have got now an interview with me, and what are the 10 things that you need to think about, okay? And I'm going to do these in the order of their commandments, but not in any particular order. But my first commandment is knoweth where you are going before you leave. That's my first commandment. What does that mean? Well, that means, I tell people, one of the first questions I get is, hey, should I do work in industry? Should I work in, consumer product goods like where I am? Or should I work in IT areas? Or should I do other things? I'm like, go where your passion takes you. Don't let anybody else tell you where you want to be except what areas that you're excited about. If you don't know, then ask people. It's a good chance to ask me, hey, what's it like working in a CPG industry? Into a company that's really, really big, it's global, versus talk to somebody who's working at a startup company. Talk to people who are working in governmental research. Do that research yourself, understand what it's like. And then also, what is it like to be in academia, both small school and large school academia? These are the kind of things, because that's what's going to help you understand, what's going to focus you. And once you understand that, go do that. Don't let anybody else tell you otherwise. But my biggest thing is, don't interview with me if you have no desire to work with me. And I tell you that not because I don't want to hear what you have to say, because you're taking somebody else's space. And I can tell pretty much if you're really into it, or if it's like you're using me as a practice run. Okay, and that's just, I say that because it's not fair to me, and just frankly, it's not fair to others around you. And so if you have no interest in working for P&G, you really want to work in the West Coast, and we have nothing that's west of Cincinnati, I mean, let's just do us both a favor. So I say it in politeness to you and to your friends. Hopefully that makes sense to all of you. So those are the things so know where you're going before you leave. Okay? Second commandment is time is thy enemy. When we do an interview, particularly if it's a face-to-face campus interview, I try to keep these at about 45 minutes. You could do it an hour if you really wanted to, but I try to keep it 45 minutes because I have to do a lot of them at once. Now, this is different from when you're doing a campus interview. We call it campus interview. You actually go to P&G's campus, and for PhD students or postdocs, you'll actually do a thesis presentation. Okay, typically those thesis presentations are about an hour long, maybe an hour and a half. That's different. We're talking about just sitting in the room somewhere here in the building, and you have 45 minutes with me, and that's all you've got. Okay, so in those 45 minutes, what are the things that we're going to do? We're going to spend probably 2 or 3 minutes breaking the ice, talking about the weather, talking about the game, talking about something that gets you comfortable. Okay, then I'm going to do a little bit of a, hey, how are you? Where are you from? What do you do? And I'll get a little about myself. That's probably 3 or 4 minutes. Then I'm going to say, you have 5 minutes, maybe 8. Tell me about your research, and that's all you've got. Okay, because I want to hear it. I can get from that information, from the resumes, and from the questions that I'm going to ask. I'm going to be able to understand your technical depth. Okay, to me, technical depth is, although it's a deal breaker, it's not the thing that actually breaks the ties. Okay, technical depth. I'm looking in this room. You guys are probably all really, really smart people. Okay, you have done really good work. That's not the deal breaker for me. The deal breaker is some of the other things I'm going to peel back in the conversation. And so when you have only 10 minutes to talk about your thesis, I want you to be very concise. And I'm going to give you some tips on how to do that in a second. Hit the high points. What are the critical steps, examples of innovation, some problem-solving things that you've done in your research. If you've done multiple things, particularly if you're a postdoc, or you had maybe say a 5 or 6 year time in the lab, and you've done multiple projects, just pick one. You don't have to pick. You don't have to say, listen, I was a postdoc. I'm going to talk about that, and then I'm going to talk about my first project in grad school, and then I'm going to talk about my second project. Yeah, just pick one. Okay, pick one and talk about it. Hit the high points. The rest of that time is really reserved for me to ask questions to get to know you better. I know I always save time at the very end for you to ask questions, so I always flip it at the very end, just like we're going to do here, for you to just fire me, ask me any question you want. I won't let the meeting end until you feel like you've got everything asked. But I do want to reserve probably 30 minutes for me to ask questions to you, to get to know you. Okay. Now, what are some of those things? Before I forget, Commandment 3: swallow your pride and call in the reinforcements. What does this mean? You have 10 minutes to do your presentation. Don't think that you have to then draw out every reaction. Impress me by how well you can draw a benzene ring. Call out the reinforcement. Now, this is less of an issue now than what it was probably 10 years ago, because everything now is electronic anyway. But don't be afraid to go ahead and bring in prepared slides that you're going to walk me through. Or if you want to even send it to me in advance, say, hey, Scott, we're going to talk about this project, and I want you to just, if you want to take it in advance and look at it in advance, I might get a chance to do that. But don't be afraid to do that in advance. Now, there's a couple of things. One, on that last bullet point, be careful. Whatever you do give me, that is now considered non-confidential. So if you're giving me something that is a project that you're going to try to file a patent on with your advisor, do not give that to me. Okay, at that point it's considered a disclosure. So please be sure with your advisors if you can share that stuff. But any manuscripts, reprints, I've had people do PowerPoint presentations with me. That's fine. Just understand that if it's a presentation that you're reapplying from a different time, you may have to condense it, because typically you don't do a 10-minute PowerPoint presentation. But those are all fair game, in my opinion, when I have these discussions. I don't want to have this full drawn out part of the work, because you only have a little bit of time to share this with me. So that's Commandment 3. 4, knoweth thy devil's advocate. And what does that mean? Defending the so what. It's exactly what I call it, defending the so what. You should be able to explain within the first couple minutes not only what you're doing, but more importantly, why you're doing it. And explain. And you don't have to necessarily, I say as if you're explaining to your grandmother, you don't necessarily have to dumb it down, but you need to make it, if you had to say in 30 seconds, not what I'm doing, but why I'm doing it. Why are you doing this research? It can't just be because your advisor told you so. Okay? It has to be because I'm trying to understand this mechanism, because we believe this mechanism is really paramount to understanding type 2 diabetes. And we know that type 2 diabetes is really important because it afflicts so many thousands of people a year. Something like that helps really distill down why you're doing it. I can tell you most people, most faculty here on campus, in fact if not all, aren't doing things for their own pedagogical love of the science. They're actually doing it for some reason. And then somebody gave them money to go do that. Why? Okay? That's the question I want to understand. Interviews really are won and lost on this. I will tell you that if I can't pull out from you why you're doing it, that is a flag to me that you don't understand your work. And if that's the case, why would I bring you into my company to have you write a project if you don't know why you're doing it, other than your boss told you to? Okay. So it should come out in the first 2 minutes. And typically what I like to hear is, I'm going to talk about my research, my postdoc research, here at Michigan. This was a project that I started with my advisor. We're doing this because these reasons. And in particular, I want to show you about some of the real key deliverables that I made in this project and some key insights that I provided to this group. That's a great way to start off that conversation and then go into what those 2-3 things are you did. And that's probably sufficient. Okay. I know it seems cheap, that 5 years of work can be distilled down into 4 minutes. But that's okay, because you will get your opportunity to shine when we do a campus interview. Okay? Your depth will come out in full force. But the reality is we just don't have time in my discussions with you. And the ability to do it concise. The hardest thing is doing, in fact, I have a funny Michigan story. So Gary, we had a postdoc in our group, Jonathan Woodward, was in my group with, we had to write an article, Jack's communication for Gary. I had written already probably 2 or 3 full articles. It was the hardest thing I ever had to write, because it was only 1.5 pages. The ability to be concise, I would argue, is more difficult than the ability to be, just out there and just throw everything out. So, defend the so what. Speaketh plainly. Now, I actually violate this commandment quite often, and that is trying to speak clearly and slowly. It's not too uncommon for people like us who think so fast sometimes we think faster than we speak. Interestingly, I actually find this more of an issue with individuals who English is their native language than individuals where English is a second language. Probably because it comes so natural to those who speak English as a primary language. That all said, try to really be very clear and enunciate. Because if I can't follow you, then it's going to be really hard to figure out who you are. It's practice your thesis summary. That's a good opportunity, because if you only have, say, 4 or 5 minutes, it's not a bad idea to practice it. Now, I would not have it written down as a script, because likely that script will get broken in the first 2 or 3 minutes if I start asking questions, or something else happens and we need to get off script. But at least practice what your main points of your thesis summary is, and that'll really get you going in the right direction. Because the intent of the interview is not to talk about the thesis, but to get into the questions. Okay. Okay. Commandment 6 is looketh into the mirror. And one of the common misconceptions about an interview is that you can't prepare for it. That's actually completely untrue. You can actually prepare for an interview. My suggestion for you to prepare for the interview is to study you. And what does that mean? I would go back all the way to high school. What are some of the things that you have done in your life from when you were probably 16 that you think are significant events in your life? It could be a major academic achievement when you were in high school. It could be a big athletic achievement. It could be a big voluntary achievement. It's a volunteer group, or it could be anything you did as an undergraduate, and certainly everything you've done as a graduate. Have all that. Understand what that is. Understand your history, so that when time comes for a question, you can pull from that repository. Okay. One of the things that when I do the resume review later today, when I look at the resumes, I always circle things I want to see. I don't want to necessarily ask you about it. I want them to come out in the answers. So sometimes I'll actually ask a question where I think that's going to be the answer to the question. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you surprise me. Sometimes it is. Particularly if you were like a student body president in high school. I'll say, give me an example of when you were in a leadership position and you had to motivate the group to do something that they felt was not in their best interest. Okay, and then I'm thinking they might go down that route. Those are the kind of things I'm looking for. But it's because you're answering a bunch of questions about you. Study your own past. I love the point here about going beyond your thesis work, one of the things that I constantly hear when I do interviews is they always go back to the same part of their research. You know, when I had to go do this, and I'm like, yeah, but what else did you do? Many of you are probably 25, 26, 28 years old. That's probably a good 10 years of work that you've done that you can pull from that experience. And I love to have the breadth of your experience, not just the depth. All right, Commandment 7. Driveth thy chariot. We call it the car. Have you heard the term car? You have? Some have? Some have? Context, action, results. It's the best way to, probably it's the best way to communicate in general, but it's a great way to answer questions, right? So if I ask a question, I'm going to give you an example here next. If I ask a question, provide the context behind what you're going to tell me. What did you do? And then why? What was the result of that? Because it helps me frame up the example. In our company, we have what we call 9 success drivers. They're grouped into 3 categories: basically leadership, agility, and people skills, and which is different than leadership. And we ask questions in those categories, those 9 categories. And I'm looking for concrete examples of that. And so the best way to give me an example is to give me that context, action, and result. That's one that you really need to practice a few times. I do have an example. Make sure I miss anything. Here's an example. Tell me about a time when others used you as a resource because of your expertise. Okay, now this is obviously a fictional one. It's like I was approached by a student in another group to help them run GCMS when I was our lab's expert. I set up time where we could discuss her needs, arrange time on the instrument, and gave her hands-on training. Since then, she has gained proficiency in the instrument and uses me as a resource to troubleshoot. That's a very concise example. I would probably take that answer and peel back. So what are some of the other things that you've done? Why were you considered the resource expert? How did you get to be that point? But those are the things but that's a great example of a very concise car to a question. Okay. Any questions before I? Okay. I know this is going fast because this was originally designed to be like a 15-minute presentation. Commandment 8. There are no wrong answers to your history. There are just better ones. And I say that because a lot of times the impression is when I ask a question that you have to answer it quickly to show that you're confident. And that may be the biggest mistake you can make, is answering it and taking me down a path which is probably not the best example that you wanted to give. And so one of the things I advise you is when somebody asks you a question in an interview is just pause for a second. I'm okay to say, you know what, let me think about the answer. Let me think about the best answer to that question. That's what I want to hear. I want to hear you processing that question to give me the best answer. And so I've had people, I've had a good 30 seconds just awkward silence. I'm like, yeah, go ahead. I'll wait until you give me that answer. Because what I want you to do is really give me the representation of who you are. Again, I'm also assuming you're processing in your head, okay, as I come up with this example, what's my car? What's my context? What's my action? What's my result? That's exactly what I'm hoping is going to come out of that. And I'll help guide you along. I'm okay if, when you give me an example, it's missing the results. I'll ask that. So I don't feel like that's a bad thing at all. Sometimes you just process it so quickly. I help you complete the whole car process. Because that's what I'm trying to figure out is what, because at the end of the day, if there's no result, then I have no way of knowing what you've done is meaningful or not. Avoid repeat examples. I want to overemphasize this if I can. One of the things that I try to avoid, I try to steer people away from, is always going back to the same example. That I want to say, yeah, that was a good example of me being really innovative, but it was also a really good example of me being collaborative, and it was a really good example of me being a leader. Yeah, but I'm sure that they are, but I need that does give me depth, okay, or breadth. It just shows me that one area. So try to use that time to think about what are the other examples that you can pull out in this interview. Okay. Knoweth thy company. When you interview, my funny story is when I was at Indiana postdocing, I was ready to start interviewing, and I violated this because when I interviewed with P&G, I thought it was PPG. And I thought it was, because I was doing work, and I was seriously, I'm like, why would PPG want to interview me? Because they do paints. That's fine. Because at the time I was doing more microbiology than anything else. And when I get there and it was P&G, I'm like, okay. Where are you guys located? You're in Pittsburgh, right? No, we're in Cincinnati. Okay. So my advice is, know the company. I didn't get this advice when I was there about who you're actually interviewing with. I just showed up thinking it would be just another interview. You know, today, of course, back then we barely had internet. But you know, use the opportunity to understand what the company's all about. What are some of the recent events? And so, for example, I would love to have somebody come up to me in an interview and go, you know, hey, how does that Cody merger affect you? If you've been following P&G, you know what that means. Okay, we're spinning off a very large portion of our company with Cody and to form a new company, and that actually is going to affect a lot of us greatly. Okay, but that might be a good example of you actually showing some interest in the company. You know, I get a lot of interesting questions. One of the questions I get is, what's your typical day like? My typical day is that they're not typical. That's the answer to that question. There's no such thing as a typical day, other than the fact that I'm in a lot of meetings, it seems like. So that's it. Come casual and dress. You know, this don't. If you feel like you need to dress up to feel professional, that's fine. Obviously, I want you to be comfortable, clean. If you're working in the lab, do clean up a little bit. I've been there before. I know how labs smell. Anything else there? I think that's it. My 10th commandment is sharpen the saw. And what this is you know, get help from anybody who's willing to give you feedback. Use me. I've had many people kind of after the interview say, you know what, after it's over, can you just tell me, what do you think? How did I do? What are the things, and I'm more than willing to give you feedback on, you know what, I think you went to that example too many times. Okay, I think maybe what you need to do is give me a better example of that. Or maybe it's, yeah, I think, you know, looking at your resume, you might really want to consider doing a postdoc to get more on there. If the company that, you know, I work for is something that you're interested in. Other cases, maybe, hey, you know what, it was great. It was a great interview. I felt like I got everything I need, and we'll see where it takes us. Just so you recognize, you know, my process of interviewing, if I interview you and you quote pass, or I move you along in the system, that doesn't guarantee you anything other than the fact you're moving to the next level. I may have you earmarked for a particular role that's open, but so are other recruiters in other schools. Okay, so there's no guarantees, but I can certainly try to lobby on behalf of my fellow you know, Michigan alums. We've gotten a few from this school that work at P&G, and it's just a big company, and it's just we recruit from a lot of places. Again, practice your opening thesis, build on your strengths, and address your development areas. You know, the sharpen the saw. Does anybody know where that comes from? Is anybody a Stephen Covey fan? You heard of Stephen Covey? The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. All right, you guys know. Okay, so that's the 7th habit is sharpen the saw. Basically, it's always continue to learn. So I mean, I'm back in school right now. Actually, I just started an online class this week, and I'm through UC Davis on fundamentals of sensory science. So I'm actually going to class. I'm 20 some odd years out of college, and I'm back in school. So don't be afraid to constantly be learning. Obviously, you are still at the height of your learning, but even then, you can learn more. Okay. And the last is commandment 10, which is goeth, and that is go do it. I mean, go do what you want to do. Go, whatever it is that's going to take you to where you want to be. Just go.